Before we start the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers.
The Varkata drifted through the broken remains of what was once a thriving moon, its jagged pieces orbiting a dead planet in slow, mournful silence. The ship was an ugly thing, scarred metal plates welded over centuries of damage, its hull decorated with crude trophies from conquered worlds. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of oil, sweat, and something older, something rotten. It was the perfect vessel for Captain Zruel and his kind. Zruel lounged on his command throne, a massive iron-riveted seat that groaned under his bulk. His skin was a thick, ash-gray hide patterned with the scars of old battles, and his tusks jutted from his jaw like broken blades. His cold reptilian eyes flicked to the blinking alert on the navigation console. "A pod," muttered Brakar, the first mate, his three-fingered claws tapping the screen. "Drifting from the debris field. No power, no distress code." Zruel grunted, the sound halfway between a snarl and a laugh. "Abandoned or bait?" "Scans show one life form," Brakar added. "Humanoid, minimal readings, weak." Zruel's lip curled in disdain. "Another stray to sell. Humans fetch a fine price these days." At the slaver's barked orders, a boarding skiff detached from the Varkata and coasted toward the pod. A group of grizzled raiders accompanied Brakar, their armor mismatched, their weapons bearing the stains of a dozen brutal campaigns. They expected no trouble. This was not a war zone. This was salvage. The escape pod itself was battered but intact, its hull scorched from atmosphere re-entry. Inside, lying against the curved wall, was a man. Adrian Moreau's head lolled as the hatch hissed open. His short-cropped hair was matted with blood, his face pale, a deep gash across his brow. His clothes, charred remnants of a pressure suit, offered no obvious threat, and when Brakar prodded him with a shock staff, Adrian merely groaned and slumped further. "Pathetic," sneered Rek, one of the younger raiders, jabbing the human again. "No fight left in him." "Good," Brakar said. "Easier to chain." They shackled Adrian with thick plasma-forged restraints, binding wrists and ankles, and hauled him aboard without ceremony. As the skiff rumbled back to the mothership, Rek poked and prodded at the prisoner, jeering in a crude mix of galactic tongues. Adrian offered no response. His head remained bowed, his breathing shallow. Behind his bruised eyelids, Adrian counted every movement, every voice, every shift of pressure and vibration through the deck plates. His mind, sharpened by years of brutal training, catalogued it all with clinical precision. Back aboard the Varkata, Zruel descended from his throne to inspect the prize. He loomed over Adrian, sniffing the air like a predator scenting weakness. "You are a rare find," he rumbled, voice deep enough to rattle the chains binding the prisoner. "Human, fragile, precious." Adrian kept his face slack, his body loose. He had spent years perfecting the art of playing dead, waiting for moments just like this. "Put him with the others," Zruel ordered. "We'll clean him up later. He'll make a fine centerpiece for the next auction." As the slavers dragged him toward the holding pens, Adrian allowed his head to roll, noting the way the ship's corridors twisted and branched, memorizing the position of ventilation grates, maintenance, hatches, security checkpoints. He noted the rhythms, how often the guards glanced over their shoulders, how tight their grip on their weapons became when shadows danced oddly. They were complacent, lazy, used to dealing with cowed prisoners, not men like him. The pens were little, more than cages stacked atop one another, filled with miserable, defeated souls from 100 conquered species. Adrian was shoved into a corner cell and left shackled to a rusted pipe. Rek spat near his feet before stalking away, laughing. Alone at last, Adrian shifted his posture slightly, flexing his wrists to test the give in the restraints. The cuffs were solid, but the pipe itself groaned under even the smallest movement. Good. Beyond the bars, the ship throbbed with the hum of its ancient engines. In the dim light, Adrian could see the haunted eyes of the other prisoners watching him, but none spoke. Fear had long since crushed their hope. Adrian closed his eyes, breathing slow and deep, letting the tension drain from his limbs. He could not afford haste. Survival, infiltration, elimination, these were the principles that had kept him alive in places far worse than this. A few hours later, the cell block doors clanged open again. Rek returned, swaggering, accompanied by two larger slavers. They laughed and jostled one another, dragging a cart piled high with slop bowls. As they approached Adrian's cell, Rek paused, smirking. "Look at this one," he said, twirling a shock prod lazily. "Thin skin. I bet he squeals nice." Adrian kept his gaze on the floor, feigning weakness, letting drool spill from the corner of his mouth. "Bah," one of the others said. "Leave him." "No. Sport in a broken toy." Rek wasn't listening. He opened the cell door with a clang and stepped inside, the prod buzzing to life in his hand. He jabbed Adrian's ribs hard enough to leave burns. Adrian didn't move. Not yet. Rek sneered and leaned closer, reaching out to grab a handful of Adrian's hair, forcing his head up. "Maybe I'll carve my mark on you before we sell you." In one fluid motion, Adrian twisted his neck, clamping down on Rek's wrist between his shoulder and jaw, trapping the arm. Before the others could react, Adrian shifted his weight and kicked backward, snapping the rusted pipe with a sharp metallic scream. Rek howled, wrenching back, but Adrian was faster. He surged upward, slamming his forehead into the slaver's nose with a sickening crunch. Blood sprayed. The other two guards shouted, fumbling for weapons. Adrian ripped the shock prod from Rek's limp hand and flung it like a dagger. It struck the nearest guard square in the throat, convulsing him into unconsciousness. Adrian turned to the last one, a mountain of muscle armed with a heavy plasma axe. The slaver swung with a roar, but Adrian ducked low, closed the distance, and drove an elbow into the alien's gut. As the brute doubled over, Adrian seized the axe and reversed it, using its own weight to smash the slaver's skull against the bars. 3 bodies hit the floor within seconds. The entire cell block fell. Into stunned silence, Adrian knelt beside Rek's twitching form, plucking a ring of security keys from his belt. He tossed one to a nearby cage, locking eyes with a battered reptilian prisoner whose scars told stories even Adrian could respect. "Catch," Adrian said, his voice low and commanding. The alien caught the keys, fumbling in disbelief. Around the block, prisoners began murmuring, trembling fingers fumbling at locks. Adrian didn't wait to see the results. He stripped the nearest slaver of his armor, fastening pieces to his own frame in rough fashion. Blood still dripped from his forehead, but his blue eyes burned cold and clear now. He moved silently to the door, listening. No alarms yet. Good. He needed time. Behind him, the first prisoners were stepping free, blinking like animals emerging from long captivity. Some wept. Some fell to their knees. Others, stronger, picked up fallen weapons with shaking hands. Adrian allowed himself a grim smile. The slavers thought they had captured prey. They had caged a predator. He melted into the shadows, a ghost among the dying ship, as chaos began to stir in his wake. The corridors of the Varkta were a maze of rusted steel and flickering lights, built without grace or symmetry. Every step Adrian took was calculated, every breath measured, his instincts sharpening with every heartbeat. He moved like a phantom through the lower decks, the slaver's own patchwork construction offering him the perfect cover. Around him, the freed prisoners stirred in confusion and fear, uncertain whether to flee or fight. Adrian did not intend to leave that choice to them for long. He ducked into a maintenance shaft as a patrol stomped past, their boots clanging against the deck plates. Their formation was loose, their discipline laughable. Adrian could hear them muttering nervously about the prison break, each trying to outboast the other while fear gnawed at their confidence. These were not soldiers. They were butchers and scavengers, used to helpless victims, not trained killers. From the shadows, Adrian observed them disappear down the corridor, memorizing their routes. His eyes flicked to a grated hatch bolted into the wall. He tested it with a firm tug. The hinges protested, but gave way. Beyond it, narrow ducts stretched into darkness branching toward critical systems. It was imperfect intelligence, but enough. Infiltrate, sabotage, isolate, the basic pillars of asymmetric warfare. He slid into the duct without hesitation, moving on his elbows and knees with silent efficiency. In his mind, he mapped the ship's crude skeleton: slave pens, barracks, engine rooms, armory. Priority targets formed in his thoughts as cold certainty settled over him. To win here, he would have to break the Varkata's spine before they realized how dangerous he was. Reaching a junction, he paused, listening. Through the thin walls, voices echoed from a lower deck. Zrul's voice, impossible to mistake, barked, orders through a grating snarl. Adrian stilled his breath and pressed closer. "Seal the slave decks," Zrul snapped. "Flush the ventilation if you have to. Burn them out. I want no survivors." "But Captain," Brakar's voice interjected, uncertain. "What of the merchandise? Some are valuable. I will not lose my ship over a handful of worthless carcasses." Zrul roared. "If one escaped, others will follow. End this before it spreads." Adrian's lips curled into a humorless smile. "Good. Let them panic." Fear made enemies sloppy. He moved again, navigating the ducts until he found a service hatch overlooking the engine coolant distribution hub. A cluster of slavers, 5 of them, heavily armed, guarded the entrance, lounging with the bored impatience of men who believed the fight was elsewhere. Adrian counted their weapons: 2 shock carbines, a plasma cutter, a pair of bludgeons, crude but deadly in close quarters. His own arsenal consisted of a scavenged stun baton and the element of surprise. He studied their positions, waiting for the subtle shift, the inattentive glance, the loosened grip. It came when one of the guards bent to scratch a taloned foot. Adrian dropped from the shaft like a striking viper. The first guard barely had time to lift his head before Adrian drove the baton into his throat, cutting off his scream with a bone-snapping impact. The second stumbled back, fumbling for his carbine, but Adrian was already moving, sweeping low to knock his legs from under him. A swift, brutal jab to the temple finished the job. The remaining 3 roared in alarm, but the tight quarters worked against them. Adrian kept moving, using the stunned bodies as shields. A plasma bolt scorched past his ear, carving a smoking gouge in the wall. Adrian closed the distance with terrifying speed, ripping the carbine from his attacker's grasp and slamming the butt into the alien's chestplate, denting the metal inward. One of the brutes charged, swinging a bludgeon. Adrian sidestepped, caught the descending arm, and twisted until joints shattered. The slaver howled, but the sound died under a precise blow to the skull. In less than a minute, the room was silent again, broken only by the labored gasps of the wounded. Adrian wiped sweat from his brow and set to work, moving swiftly. He accessed the coolant control console, overriding the primitive security with knowledge born from countless field missions. The ship's thermal systems were already stretched thin. A little sabotage would push them past the brink. With a few keystrokes, he diverted coolant flow from the slave decks to the bridge sector. Engines would overheat, internal temperatures would soar, and emergency lockdowns would trigger in-key compartments. The Varkata would turn against itself. Alarms began to wail almost immediately, the ship shuddering as systems fought the sudden imbalance. Adrian didn't wait. He grabbed a fallen shock carbine and melted back into the shadows, moving toward his next target. On the main decks, chaos erupted. Brakar bellowed into the comms, trying to rally squads to strategic points, but his orders overlapped and contradicted, sowing more confusion. Prisoners armed themselves with whatever they could find, ambushing their former captors in tight corridors and storage bays. Adrian saw none of it directly, but he felt the ripples of disruption. With every meter he gained, near the barracks he found another opportunity. A slaver communication station, crude but essential, sat lightly guarded by 3 officers huddled around sputtering screens. Adrian watched them for a moment, gauging their tension, then struck with calculated ferocity. The shock carbine's stock made no noise as it cracked skulls. Adrian dismantled the station with methodical precision, yanking out power cores and fusion relays. He disabled short-range comms, emergency beacons, even internal sensors. In less than 5 minutes, the Varkata was blind, deaf and bleeding from within. Still, he was not satisfied. Every soldier knew the danger of an enemy allowed to regroup, as thou. Adrian moved deeper into the ship's heart. He encountered his first real resistance. A squad of elite slavers clad in heavier armor and wielding magnetic pulse rifles blocked the path to the central security hub. These were no lazy guards. They were hunters, trained and bred for suppression. Adrian crouched behind a bulkhead surveying their formation. Tight, overlapping fields of fire. Synchronized movement. Better, but not perfect. He drew a deep breath, centering himself. A broken conduit above their heads sparked intermittently. Adrian traced its cable run along the ceiling, noting a junction box within reach. Risky, loud, but effective. Timing his movement between the flickers of failing lights, he crawled along the shadows, reaching the box. With the butt of his stolen carbine, he smashed it open and yanked free the primary coupling. Sparks exploded outward. The conduit above the squad ruptured, raining molten metal and searing arcs of electricity. The slavers screamed, momentarily blinded and disoriented. Adrian moved without hesitation, weaving through their broken formation. His stolen carbine spat deadly precision, each shot finding a critical weakness in armor or flesh. When the smoke cleared, only Adrian remained standing. He exhaled slowly, lowering his weapon. His muscles ached, his ribs throbbed from hidden bruises, but adrenaline carried him forward. The security hub loomed ahead, a thick door reinforced with layered alloys and kinetic dampeners. Adrian approached the console, grimacing. Too complex to brute force without specialized equipment. Then he smiled grimly, remembering the scorched comm station and the cascading system failures he had unleashed. Red warning lights blinked weakly across the console. The door's failsafes had been compromised. He entered a command override, gambling on corrupted circuits. With a reluctant groan, the security door cracked open. Inside, rows of monitors displayed fractured feeds. Flickering, images of raging fires, panicked slavers, armed prisoners. The nerve center of the ship was crippled but not yet dead. Adrian moved methodically, planting a scavenged demolition charge at the core terminal. The explosive was primitive, barely controlled, but it would do the job. He set the timer. 10 minutes. As he exited the hub, he paused, glancing at a final console near the doorway. It was a broadcast system, short range, localized. A thought struck him, grim and precise. He activated the broadcast. Across the slaver decks, the speakers crackled and hissed before a single voice filled the ship. "You made one mistake," Adrian's voice intoned low and lethal. "You thought humans were prey." Every corner of the Varkata seemed to still prisoners and slavers alike listening. "You were wrong." Adrian cut the transmission and vanished down the corridor, leaving only the echo of his words behind. Behind him, the security hub detonated with a roar, shattering what little order remained aboard the ship. The hunt had only just begun. The Varkta groaned under its own failing systems, a wounded beast thrashing blindly through space. Adrian moved through the chaos like a specter, invisible but ever-present. Fires raged unchecked in several compartments, the air heavy with the stench of scorched metal and burnt flesh. Slavers fought each other in the confusion, some trying to restore order, others simply trying to flee. Adrian understood that moment of fear too well. Discipline had shattered. Authority had collapsed. What remained was raw survival, and no creature fought more viciously when cornered than the desperate. The central passage leading toward the command deck was partially collapsed, debris littering the floor. Adrian crouched low, carbine at the ready, his boots crunching softly over broken glass and twisted steel. He scanned the shadows for movement. Every flicker of light, every creak of stressed metal, set his nerves buzzing. His senses were tuned to a lethal edge. Ahead, he spotted a slaver barricade hastily assembled from overturned supply crates and scavenged armor plating. 5 figures huddled behind it, 2 manning heavy blaster emplacements that covered the only approach. They barked harsh orders to unseen comrades, desperate to create a semblance of control. Adrian assessed the situation with clinical precision. A frontal assault would be suicide. The narrow corridor funneled attackers directly into their kill zone. He needed another way. Turning, he slipped into a maintenance access tunnel, running parallel to the passage. It was cramped, barely wide enough for him to crawl through, but it offered a critical advantage: proximity. He inched forward, feeling the heat radiating from damaged conduits, ignoring the sweat trickling down his spine. He emerged behind the slaver line, concealed by the warped remains of a wall panel. He raised the carbine, lining up his shots with deliberate care. The first two slavers fell without a sound, precision bolts punching through the gaps in their armor. The others reacted too late, spinning around in confusion. Adrian was already moving, a fluid blur of lethal intent. He vaulted the barricade, closing the distance before they could bring their weapons to bear. A blaster bolt grazed his shoulder, searing fabric and skin, but he ignored the pain. He drove the butt of the carbine into the shooter's throat, dropping him instantly. Another swung a plasma torch wildly. Adrian ducked under the arc, disarming him with a brutal joint lock, then finished him with a swift, bone-crunching strike. Within moments, the barricade was silent. Bodies sprawled awkwardly across the blood-slick floor. Adrian paused only long enough to scavenge a fresh power cell for his weapon. He knew time was slipping away. Somewhere ahead, Zrul would be consolidating his remaining forces, preparing a last stand. Adrian intended to meet him head-on. He pressed deeper into the ship, moving with relentless purpose. The closer he drew to the command deck, the heavier the resistance became. Slavers who had once ruled through fear now fought with the desperation of men who knew their end was near. Small squads attempted ambushes from side corridors and pressure locks. Adrian countered each with brutal efficiency. He fought without hesitation, his movements economical and merciless, conserving his dwindling strength. Every engagement left him more battered, but also more determined. In one blood-soaked corridor, he encountered a prisoner uprising in full swing. A group of human captives, gaunt and filthy but burning with savage purpose, had overrun a slaver checkpoint. They wielded stolen weapons and makeshift clubs, their faces twisted in rage. Adrian emerged from the smoke and ruin like an avenging spirit, and for a moment, they recoiled, mistaking him for another slaver. He lowered his weapon slightly, nodding once. Recognition flickered in their eyes. Without a word, Adrian took the lead, and they fell in behind him, a ragged but determined cohort. It wasn't loyalty. It was survival. They saw what he was, what he represented, and chose to follow. Their numbers grew as they advanced, gathering freed prisoners and scattered survivors. Adrian did not speak to them. He did not need to. His every action spoke volumes: relentless forward motion, ruthless precision, absolute refusal to yield. The final stretch before the command deck was a gauntlet of death. Zrul had fortified the year approach, deploying his best troops in hardened defensive positions. Heavy weapons emplacements covered every angle, overlapping fields of fire designed to tear apart any assault. Adrian crouched behind a twisted bulkhead, surveying the battlefield. His stolen force, ragged, underarmed, half-starved, stood little chance against a direct charge. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. Tactics formed in his mind, born of instinct and hard-earned experience. He needed a diversion, something to break the enemy's focus, even for a few precious seconds. He found it in the ventilation system. The slavers had routed emergency gas lines through the upper ducts. A few well-placed shots could ignite the volatile mixture, creating chaos among Zrul's defenders. Adrian signaled two of the former prisoners, selecting the ones who moved with the surest steps, who still had the fire of discipline in their eyes. With brief, sharp gestures, he outlined the plan. They nodded, grim-faced, while Adrian drew the defenders' attention with feigned probes and sniper shots from the flanks. The two men slipped into the maintenance shafts. Minutes stretched into agonizing eternity as blaster fire scorched the air around him, but Adrian held his ground, weaving and counterattacking with precision. Then, at last, the ducts erupted in a roaring inferno. Fire and shrapnel rained down upon the slaver lines, throwing them into disarray. Screams filled the corridor as defenders broke ranks, scrambling for cover. Adrian did not hesitate. He surged forward, leading the charge. The freed prisoners followed with a ragged battle cry, hurling themselves at the broken slaver line. The Thai fighting was savage and intimate, hand to hand, blade to blade. Adrian moved through it all like a force of nature, striking with lethal precision, never lingering, never faltering. He caught sight of Zrul across the melee. The slaver captain stood atop a command platform, barking furious orders, trying to rally his crumbling forces. His once proud armor was scorched and battered, his eyes wild with desperation. Their gazes met across the battlefield. Adrian smiled grimly. The final confrontation was inevitable. Fighting his way through the thinning ranks, Adrian closed the distance. Slavers threw themselves in his path, but they were too few, too broken. He cut them down without mercy, every step driving him closer to his target. At last, he reached the base of the platform. Zrul drew a massive plasma cleaver from his belt, its blade humming with deadly energy. He leapt down, roaring a guttural challenge. Adrian met him without hesitation. The first clash of weapons sent shockwaves through the corridor. Adrian sidestepped the cleaver's deadly arc, retaliating with a series of rapid strikes aimed at Zrul's joints. The slaver captain fought with brutal strength, but his movements were slow, telegraphed by years of relying on overwhelming force rather than skill. Adrian danced around him, wearing him down with relentless precision. Every dodge, every parry, every counterattack chipped away at Zrul's strength, his confidence, his very will to fight. At last, Zrul overcommitted, swinging wide in a desperate, clumsy attack. Adrian seized the opening. He slipped inside the slaver's guard, driving the carbine's barrel under Zrul's chin and pulling the trigger. The blast tore through bone and flesh, dropping the captain like a stone. For a heartbeat, the battlefield froze. Then the remaining slavers threw down their weapons and fled, the will to fight utterly broken. Adrian stood over Zrul's twitching body, his chest heaving, his weapon lowered. Around him, the freed prisoners stared in stunned silence. The ship was theirs now. But Adrian knew it wasn't over. Beyond the Varkta lay open space, hostile and uncaring. Escape was not yet guaranteed. Survival was not yet assured. He turned to the prisoners, his voice rough but commanding. "Secure the bridge," he ordered. "Arm yourselves. Prepare for anything." They moved without question, galvanized by his presence. Adrian spared one final glance at Zrul's corpse, then moved forward, his steps steady, his purpose clear. The fight for freedom was not yet won, but it had begun. The command deck of the Varkta was a shattered cathedral of twisted metal and failing lights. Sparks rained from burst panels, casting strobes across the darkened consoles. Smoke drifted like ghostly banners through the air, curling around, the feet of the men who had seized it not by rank but by blood, grit, and sheer will. Adrian stood at the helm, his gloved hands resting lightly on the edge of the command terminal. His gaze was fixed on the forward viewport, where the cold black of space stretched endlessly, punctuated by distant stars and the burning wreckage of the slaver fleet they had decimated from within. The bridge was silent except for the low hum of emergency power systems. No one spoke. No one dared. Every man present, the gaunt prisoners turned fighters, the wounded, the shaken, watched Adrian with wary reverence. He hadn't just led them, he had transformed them. In his presence, they stood straighter, even through pain. They waited not for orders but for purpose. He was no longer just a prisoner to them. He was something else. Adrian's voice, when it came, was low and firm. "We don't have long." One of the men, Thomas, the grizzled engineer with a mangled arm and a face that had seen more years behind bars than free, stepped forward. "They'll come looking," he rasped. "Slaver patrols, Varkata's overdue on 3 routes. Protocol'll have 'em sniffing around in hours." Adrian nodded, already pulling up the ship's tactical maps. "We can't stay. There's a jump gate 3 systems out. Unmarked, buried in a brown dwarf's radiation belt. A backdoor traders used before the war. If it's still functional, we use it. And if it's not, someone asked. Then we die trying. Adrian said simply. No one objected. The tactical situation was dire. The Varkta was crippled, life support degraded, weapons offline in several sectors, and the warp drive requiring a full reset from the engineering deck. Worse, scans showed a small cruiser already approaching from the outer edge of the system. A slaver response ship, no doubt pulled from patrol. Adrian turned to Thomas. How fast can you reboot the drive? Thomas hesitated. With full crew? 30 minutes. With us? 45 maybe. If the Corps doesn't slag us. We don't have 45. Then we better start moving. Thomas muttered, already limping toward the lift. Adrian looked over the ragged men around him. Most were barely holding together, starved, bloodied, too long denied their humanity, but still upright, still ready. You know the stakes, Adrian said. They take this ship back. They don't put you in chains. They space you. You've all killed slavers. You think they forgive that? He looked into their eyes, hardened, haunted. So we fight, one last time. Murmurs rippled through them, then hardened into grim nods. Weapons were checked, positions taken. A few men even grinned, the madness of freedom burning behind their tired faces. In the hangar bay, Adrian organized the defense himself. He couldn't rely on these men to hold a traditional line. They weren't soldiers. But they were smart. And now they had a reason. He showed them how to funnel boarding parties through narrow kill corridors, how to use wreckage as traps, how to strike fast, disappear, and strike again. Guerrilla tactics. He'd used them in jungles and city blocks before. The principles didn't change. By the time the slaver cruiser docked, the Varkta was a ship of ghosts. The first wave of boarders stormed through the breached port hatch, armored and armed with confidence. They made it 30 meters. Explosives, hidden in wall vents, tore the squad apart. Survivors stumbled into crossfire as Adrian's men opened up from behind debris. Blood sprayed across the corridor. 2 of Adrian's fighters went down, but the others held. The second wave was smarter, more cautious. They brought drones and used thermal scanners. But Adrian had anticipated that too. He led a counter-ambush through an upper gantry, dropping into their midst with brutal efficiency. His knife did more work than his gun. Every thrust deliberate, every movement silent. They fell back. In the dark, Adrian stood over a dying slaver, his black visor cracked, mouth leaking purple blood. The creature gasped, trying to speak. Adrian leaned in. You thought we were prey, he said softly. But you forgot one thing. He pressed his sidearm to the alien's temple and pulled the trigger. Humans bite back. Minutes bled into hours. The ship groaned under the pressure of hull breaches and cascading system failures. Fires erupted in the secondary compartments. A reactor coolant line burst on deck 11. The slaver cruiser began targeting exterior, weak points with precision strikes. Still, Adrian fought. Still, his men followed. On the engineering deck, Thomas screamed orders at a half-functioning console. Sparks flew as his team manually bypassed core safeties. Almost there, he bellowed. Another 90 seconds. Make it 60, Adrian replied over comms. Then the deck shook violently. The slaver cruiser had locked a plasma lance on the aft engine housing. They were seconds from breaching the core. Adrian sprinted from the upper levels, cutting across what was left of the cargo bay. He passed corpses, wounded fighters trying to stem the bleeding with ripped uniforms. Shattered, bulkheads still glowing with heat. He saw a young man, 16 maybe, clutching a blaster and laughing through tears, blood streaking his face. You're real, the boy said, as Adrian passed. He didn't stop. He arrived at the bridge just as Tomas's voice crackled over the ship-wide channel. Drive online. Adrian punched in coordinates for the unlisted jump gate, overriding all safeties. The ship shuddered as systems engaged. Outside, the slaver cruiser closed the gap, its weapons spinning up for a final kill shot. Adrian hit the jump. The stars elongated into ribbons and the ship was flung into hyperspace. Silence followed. Real silence. No alarms, no weapons fire. Just the soft hum of the jump drive and the labored breathing of the survivors around him. They had done it. The Varkata, against every odd, had escaped. Adrian didn't collapse. He simply sat down slowly, back resting against a console. His body was screaming. Every nerve aflame, every muscle pulled tight like a fraying wire. But he was still alert, still watching. One of the younger men, Rule, limped forward, holding his side. "We going home?" Adrian looked at him. "No," he said. "We can't go back." Rule blinked. "Then what?" "We find others. Ships like this, slaver vessels, camps, we burn them down." Rule stared at him. "You want to keep fighting?" Adrian's eyes, so calm and cold, locked onto his. "I didn't start this war," he said. "But I'm going. To finish it." Rule hesitated, then smiled. "You're insane." Adrian smiled back for the first time since the prison cell. "I'm French." Laughter broke the tension. Dry, cracked, mad laughter. But it spread across the bridge like wildfire. Even Thomas laughed, blood on his lips, leaning against a sparking panel. They had been caged, beaten, broken. Now they were something else. Free. The Varkata drifted toward the distant jump gate, battered but intact, carrying a cargo no slaver could ever quantify. Vengeance, hope, and the promise that Deathworlders did not die quietly. In the heart of the galaxy, where monsters hunted men, like cattle, a single human had carved a legend into the dark, and that was only the beginning.